In the blistering heat of a remote American airbase, where dust clings to steel and rank defines respect, a nameless mechanic walks among helicopters with oil-streaked hands in a past no one suspects. But when a crisis strikes and no one else can fly, the silence she's kept becomes impossible to ignore. Before we uncover her story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. The desert heat didn't ask for permission. It poured down like a hammer over the tarmac of Dustridge Air Base, making metal groan and boots stick to concrete. The Apache helicopters lined up like sleeping giants, their shadows cutting sharp lines across the sandblasted flight line. Beneath one of them, a woman knelt with a wrench in hand, eyes locked on a pressure gauge like it was a matter of life and death. Her name was Eva Miles, but around here, people barely used it. To most of the airmen and officers, she was just the mechanic, grease girl, or simply her. She was in her mid-30s, wore navy blue coveralls smudged with engine soot, and kept her blonde hair twisted tight under a faded baseball cap. She didn't talk much, didn't correct the assumptions. Why bother? The young lieutenants joked about her as they passed. Hey, someone tell maintenance the cafeteria's leaking again. Think she even knows what a throttle is? She's probably just here to wipe the joysticks. Eva didn't flinch. She never did. She wiped her hands on a rag, slid under the belly of the Apache, and continued working. The truth was, she knew that helicopter better than anyone on base. Maybe better than anyone still flying, but no one had asked. No one ever asked. What they didn't see was how she touched the fuselage with a reverence born from thousands of hours in the air. How she could listen to an engine and tell you which blade was misaligned. How her fingers didn't fumble, they remembered. Her file marked her as a civilian contractor with no combat history, no flight hours logged, just another tech filling in a gap. But that file didn't tell the whole story. Beneath her collar, at the base of her neck, a faint tattoo slept a stylized raven wrapped around a rotor blade. She kept it hidden, always, because some marks weren't meant to be seen unless necessary, and because that one, in particular, carried weight far heavier than ink. In the corner of the operations building, where old simulators flickered with dust and digital ghosts, Ava sometimes slipped in after hours. No one really noticed. They assumed she was cleaning, until one night, a senior officer, Colonel Mason, stepped in early for a briefing and caught sight of her. She was alone in the cockpit of the simulator pod. The digital terrain blurred across the screen, and the virtual Apache moved with precision no trainee could mimic. Pitch, roll, counterthrust, every move was muscle memory. It didn't look like a technician fumbling for fun. It looked like a pilot remembering who she used to be. Colonel Mason watched, his eyes narrowing. Something in her movements, in her stillness, made him hesitate. Mechanics didn't fly like that. Not unless they'd once flown for real. He didn't say anything that night, but he started watching. Colonel Mason didn't confront her that night, but the seed had been planted. From that moment on, Eva Miles wasn't just a shadow in the hangar. She had become a question, the kind that made seasoned officers pause mid-sentence. And questions like that don't stay buried for long, especially not on a military base where routine is gospel and deviations set alarms ringing. It was supposed to be a standard training day. The sun had barely crested the mountain range to the east when the emergency alert cracked through the intercom, slicing the morning silence like a blade. "Recon Unit Bravo 2 has gone dark," the voice announced. "Last known position, Grid 9C near Canyon Ridge. All available units prepare for rapid deployment." The room erupted in motion. Maps were pulled, calls made, and names shouted. But panic lingered beneath the urgency. There were only 2 operational Apaches on base. The others were either mid-repair or out of commission. Worse yet, most pilots were grounded for rotation or still running simulations. The clock was ticking. Inside Hangar 3, Eva had already heard the call. She didn't wait. She was already moving. Tail number 407D, the one she'd personally rebuilt over the past 6 months, was parked just shy of the threshold. The aircraft gleamed in the morning light. Not showroom shiny, but solid, dependable, alive. Eva jogged across the concrete, toolbox in hand, climbed onto the side frame, and began her pre-flight checks. Hydraulics, rotors, fuel pressure, diagnostics. Her hands worked with quiet authority, her mind ticking through the same checklist she'd run in muscle memory for years. She knew that bird. More than that, she trusted it. Colonel Roy Carter stormed into the hangar moments later, trailed by two junior officers, a career man in his 50s, broad-chested and sharp-jawed. He carried the authority of someone who believed the chain of command was sacred. His eyes locked on Eva as she stood beside the Apache, scanning the tablet display. "You," he barked. "Who authorized you to touch that aircraft?" Eva turned slowly, unfazed. "It's flight ready. One systems check away." "I didn't ask for your opinion. Mechanic," he snapped. "Where's your supervisor off base? I'm the senior tech on shift." "Well, you're not cleared to fly. Just make it ready. We'll put a real pilot in it." She didn't respond, just turned back to the bird and finished the sequence. Her silence wasn't defiance, it was precision. She knew what the aircraft needed. She knew what the situation required. And more than anything, she knew that no one else was ready. Inside the colonel's office, raised voices bounced off the walls. Two pilots argued over flight readiness. One had passed out during heat acclimation training. The other hadn't flown outside a simulator in 6 months. The colonel paced like a caged wolf, jaw clenched, frustration mounting. Meanwhile, Eva climbed into the cockpit. The seat cradled her like it remembered. She powered the auxiliary systems, aligned the controls, and ran the combat module sequence. The monitors blinked green, one after another. Just as she reached for the overhead switch panel, the edge of her collar shifted, and that's when it happened. Staff Sergeant Ray Booth, a logistics man with salt in his hair and more battlefield time than paperwork, happened to walk past the cockpit. He saw her, not her face, but the tattoo, a stylized pair of wings, intersected by a single black dagger, subtle, almost invisible. He froze. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, stepping closer. "Where did you get that ink?" Eva adjusted her collar without looking. "Picked it up a long time ago." Booth didn't push. He turned and walked straight into Carter's office without knocking. Seconds later, Carter burst back into the hangar, a different man. His posture had shifted. His certainty had cracked. He didn't shout this time. He looked directly at Eva, eyes scanning the aircraft. Then the call sign etched on the electronic log, Echo 6. He spoke lower now. "Is it true?" he asked. "You flew under Colonel Draper out of Taji?" She didn't answer. Didn't have to. Booth stepped forward, voice firm. "She's your best shot, sir." Carter stood there, torn between doctrine and instinct. Then, almost reluctantly, he nodded. "Get in the damn air." No applause followed. No one cheered. But when the rotors began to spin, every mechanic and flight officer in the hangar turned to watch. The Apache lifted off the tarmac like it had been waiting for her. The dust churned, the turbines roared, and Eva Miles disappeared into the desert sky, no longer a question, but an answer no one saw coming. The rotors still echoed in the air long after Eva vanished into the desert horizon. No one in the hangar spoke. They had watched a mechanic become a pilot, a shadow become a flame. Colonel Carter stood motionless, his gaze locked on the disappearing shape of the Apache, as if trying to remember where he had seen that level of control before. But for Eva, the roar of the aircraft was just white noise against something louder memory. Kandahar. 2017. The air then had not been dry like Dustridge, but heavy with smoke and diesel. Eva had been Captain Miles back then, call sign Echo 9 leading a covert air unit attached to Joint Task Force Valor. Their missions didn't exist on paper. No after-action reports, no medals, no debriefs on record, just directives whispered in shadowed rooms and coordinates scribbled on napkins. The last mission was supposed to be routine, an extraction of embedded assets near the border of Helmand, but the convoy never made it out. Intel had been faulty. Ambush was inevitable. Two Black Hawks were shot down in minutes. Communications jammed. By the time Eva's Apache arrived on station, chaos was already written across the valley in fire and blood. She stayed low, weaving through RPG fire, picking targets in rapid succession. Her co-pilot bled out mid-run, and she took over full control without skipping a beat. For 2 hours, she held the sky alone. 3 teams were saved that day because of her decisions. But when they returned to base, it was not a hero's welcome. It was silence, then interrogation, then redactions. 1 week later, she was handed a sealed envelope and told her services were no longer required. They called it a realignment of strategic assets. But Ava knew better. The mission had been classified beyond oversight. Someone needed it erased, and that included her. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. Instead, she walked away. Her DD-214 proof of honorable discharge was incomplete. The commendations were redacted. Her flight hours truncated. The only record that survived intact was tucked inside a worn folder hidden deep in her footlocker, alongside a laminated slip bearing a clearance code, Black Zone Alpha Echo. Few knew what that designation meant. Fewer survived long enough to explain it. Eva settled into civilian life under the radar, took contractor work on military bases where people didn't ask questions. She chose airfields that smelled familiar. She kept her hands dirty and her voice quiet. No news clippings, no interviews, no stories told. If anyone recognized her, they didn't say, but ghosts don't stay buried forever. Sergeant Booth was the first to truly see her, not because of the tattoo, but because he remembered a story whispered through infantry circles. A pilot who had flown alone above Kandahar, who extracted a unit pinned down for over 3 hours with no air cover. The story always ended the same way. She disappeared the next day, gone, like smoke. When he saw the Raven Dagger ink on Eva's neck, something clicked. He didn't salute her. He didn't ask for confirmation. He simply stepped back and made sure the right people knew. Carter might have hesitated, but Booth had been in the fire. He knew what a pilot looked like under pressure. He knew what trust felt like when your life depended on someone you'd never meet face to face, only hear crackle through a headset. Eva had been that voice once. Now, she was back. But return brought more than flight. It brought silence again, the kind that lives behind the eyes. Each time she touched the cyclic or leaned into a dive, Eva felt her body remember before her mind did. Yet the memories weren't victories. They were weight. She heard voices, call signs from her old crew. Some she'd saved, others she couldn't. There were nights when she'd sit alone in the hangar, long after everyone had left. The Apache would rest behind her like a sleeping beast, and she'd rest her back against its frame, eyes closed, fingers curled around the wrench like it could anchor her to the present. But the past always found its way in. Guilt was a strange thing. It didn't come from failure, but from survival. The irony was sharp. She'd been erased because she succeeded too well. The unit she led was dissolved, their history locked in vaults and off-grid archives. And yet, now that she had flown again, that old insignia echo began to resurface. Whispers in the officers' mess, questions exchanged in cautious tones. Pilots who had once ignored her now looked twice. Some of them started asking for her input, quietly, respectfully. Chief Technician Alvarez, a veteran of the Gulf War and once a vocal skeptic of female pilots, began calling her captain again, though unofficially. And a week after her unplanned deployment, a care package arrived with no name. Inside was a pristine flight manual, annotated in handwriting she hadn't seen in years. Her past wasn't just returning, it was being recognized. Eva didn't ask for it, didn't want it, but maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding. Because somewhere between the silence and the noise, between the wrench and the rotor, she was starting to believe the one thing they'd always tried to erase. She never stopped being a pilot. Her past had been buried. redacted, and denied until the moment she rose from the tarmac and took to the skies again. The days that followed whispered of change. She was no longer invisible in the hangar, no longer just the mechanic, and when the next call came, no one dared question who would lead. The second emergency was real, and this time, it wasn't just a test of memory or reflex, it was war. At 04:13 hours, the recon unit, codenamed Viper 6, sent out a single fragmented transmission from a remote basin on the edge of Red Hollow Valley. Then, silence. The terrain was jagged sandstone ridges, narrow corridors, and deep ravines, an ideal kill zone for an ambush. Command suspected insurgent training cells operating in the area. By 04:30, the call went out for an immediate response, but there was only one Apache fueled and ready. Eva was already suited. She didn't wait for orders. Colonel Carter met her halfway across the hangar floor and tossed the helmet into her hands without a word. He didn't need to speak. The choice had already been made. Her co-pilot was Lieutenant Frey, a quiet man with just enough combat hours to know when to speak and when to stay silent. As the rotors screamed to life and the skids lifted from the tarmac, he only asked one thing. "You sure about this?" Captain Eva's voice was steady. "Just keep your eyes on the ridge. I'll handle the rest." They cut through the dawn haze like a blade. The Apache moved beneath her hands with the grace of a predator. Every tilt of the rotor disc, every correction of pitch and throttle, felt like second nature. The digital maps flickered, terrain overlay casting ghosted red over the canyon system below. That's where they were headed, Red Hollow, where Viper 6 had vanished. At 300 feet AGL, Eva banked hard left, hugging the cliffs. She dropped low, beneath radar horizon, using terrain masking to stay hidden. It was a maneuver most pilots only attempted in simulators. She didn't blink. Frey watched her hands move across the controls with precision he'd only read about in manuals. "Picking up thermal traces," he said suddenly. 4 no. 5 contacts moving along the western ridge. No friendly signatures. "Confirmed," Eva replied. "We're going in." She crested the canyon lip, the Apache leveling out just 50 feet above the valley floor. Smoke curled from behind a shale outcrop, what remained of the recon unit's Humvee. The vehicle had been hit hard, shredded tires, cracked windshield, but it hadn't been abandoned. Figures were huddled behind it, one dragging another with a bloodied leg. 2 more covered them with rifles that looked too light for the kind of fire they were under. On the ridgeline to the east, muzzle flashes erupted. Eva's hand slid to the cannon control. The M230 chain gun roared, tearing a line across the ridge and scattering rock and grit. She wasn't shooting to kill yet. Warning bursts. Forceful, precise. "Stay low," she told Frey. "We make noise first. Real noise." She rotated the bird sideways, exposing the full side profile to the ridge while keeping the nose aimed down the valley's only exit path. Her second volley chewed through the sandstone outcrop where 2 hostiles had been setting up a mounted launcher. The explosion lit the canyon in a flash of dust and flame. "Friendly unit. Call sign Viper 6, she transmitted on wideband. "This is Echo 6, sit rep." A crackling voice came through, choked by static and adrenaline. 2 KIA, 1 critical, remaining pinned. "We can't move. They've got the high ground. We're boxed in. Copy. Stay behind the vehicle. Extraction in progress." Eva swung the bird into a tight rotation, pivoting over the Humvee. Her crew chief, already harnessed, opened the side door and dropped into the swirling dust. He sprinted across the gravel to the wounded, hauling them back under the rotor storm. More gunfire. This time from the canyon mouth, an enemy pickup rolling in with a mounted machine gun. Eva didn't flinch. She pivoted the nose, locked the target, and fired. 3 rounds, the first missed, the second shredded the hood. The third burst detonated the ammunition cache. The pickup vanished in a plume of black smoke. "Package secure." Her crew chief's voice cracked over the comms. "We're loaded." "Pop smoke," Eva ordered. A purple cloud billowed from beside the wrecked Humvee. She lifted, hard and fast, carving a narrow ascent between the canyon walls. The chase bird, a Black Hawk dispatched 15 minutes earlier, linked up above her vector. Together they cleared the ridge just as the sun burst over the eastern cliffs. For the first time in hours, no one was shooting. Back at base, medics rushed to meet them. The wounded were carried off. The crew dispersed in silence. Ava didn't say a word. She powered down the bird, unstrapped, and stepped onto the tarmac. Dozens watched. She didn't acknowledge them. She didn't need to. She didn't need to acknowledge them. The silence, the stares, the stillness in the air as she walked back across the tarmac, they said everything. Eva had returned, not as a rumor or relic, but as a pilot who flew headfirst into danger and brought people home. And this time, the base would not forget. Colonel Carter made the announcement that afternoon in front of the assembled officers and enlisted crew. He didn't dress it up with speeches or ceremony. That wasn't his way, but his words carried the weight of something long overdue. Effective immediately, he said, his voice firm. Captain Eva Miles is reinstated to active flight status. She will serve as lead pilot for Apache operations out of Dustridge. Any disputes with this decision can be directed to my office after you've read her service record in full. There were no objections. Only a quiet ripple through the crowd, relief, respect, a touch of embarrassment. It wasn't the kind of applause heroes got in movies. It was better, real, earned. The young pilots, the same ones who had once smirked at her grease-streaked sleeves, now stood straighter when she walked by. Some nodded. Others made space without being asked. No one joked anymore. Not because they were afraid, but because they understood. She hadn't demanded recognition. She'd simply outflown every doubt. Lieutenant Frey, her co-pilot from the Red Hollow run, left a folded note on her workbench that night. 4 words is scrawled in shaky ink. "You saved my life." Eva didn't respond. She didn't need to. But something inside her had shifted. That evening, after the hangars had emptied and the desert cooled to something close to bearable, Eva walked alone to the back of Bay 4, the oldest hangar on base. The lights flickered weakly overhead, and dust danced in the shafts of yellow light. In the far corner, wedged beneath spare blades and engine crates, stood a narrow locker with a dented side and a reinforced lock. She hadn't opened it in almost 10 years. Her fingers hesitated over the latch, then turned it slowly. Inside lay the flight helmet she hadn't worn since Kandahar. The matte black shell still bore the faded stencil of her old call sign, Echo 9, and a strip of fraying tape with a handwritten phrase, "Eyes up." No fear. She picked it up like she was holding a memory, then lowered herself onto the floor, back against the cold metal. For a long time, she said nothing, just breathed. The past was no longer a weight to be carried. It had become a foundation. She was still there, in that silence, when the knock came. A figure stood in the doorway, civilian clothes, tan boots, a weathered face that time had worn but not broken. "Didn't think I'd find you here," he said, stepping inside. Eva didn't look up. "Took you long enough." He walked in, slow and steady, like the war was still on his heels. "Saw your name come through the Joint Ops channel. Took a second to believe it was real." She finally met his gaze. "You made it out. Because of you." He sat down across from her, cross-legged like they had back in that canyon, watching the sky for drones that never came. "I never forgot what you did," he said. "None of us did. But when they erased you, we didn't know how to fight it." "You weren't supposed to," Eva replied. "That was the deal." He studied her. "That deal almost buried you." "Almost," she said. They sat in silence, the kind only shared between people who've heard the same screams, flown the same narrow corridors of death, and survived. Then, softly, he asked the question that lingered between them. "Why now? Why come back?" Eva rested her arms on her knees, eyes on the helmet. "I don't fly for medals. I don't fly for glory," she said. "I fly because someone out there needs me in the sky. and I refused to watch from the ground again. He nodded once nothing more was needed. The next morning, when the sun cracked over the flight line and warmed the concrete to a pale shimmer, Ava walked into briefing with the helmet under her arm. She didn't wear her rank insignia, didn't need to. When she entered, every pilot in the room stood, not because protocol demanded it, but because respect finally did. The pilots stood not because they were told to, but because they now understood what had always been true. Eva Miles wasn't just a mechanic. She was Echo. And Echo had returned not with fanfare or ceremony, but with grit, scars, and the kind of skill that silences even the loudest doubters. Within days, the nickname Echo 1 spread through the base like wildfire. It moved from hangar to briefing room, from barracks to the officers' mess. Some whispered it with awe, others with guilt, but no one denied it anymore. Ava had become something larger than rank. She had become a living legend. It started with the simulators. Lieutenant Corwin, the loudest of the new recruits, was scheduled for combat sim rotation the following Monday. Just 3 weeks earlier, he joked about Eva cleaning joystick grips. Now, when her call sign appeared beside his in the simulator room, Echo 1, he turned pale. His cocky grin vanished the second the sim began. It was a high-intensity extraction under live-fire simulation, and he didn't last 5 minutes. Ava, flying with one simulated engine down and half her sensors disabled, pulled a full extraction under crossfire with 0 casualties. She didn't speak once during the sim. When she stepped out of the pod, she handed Corwin a report clipboard, nodded once, and walked away. He never made another joke. The ripple effect was immediate. Fresh recruits began requesting to observe her maintenance routines. They no longer saw oil stains or grease streaks as signs of inferiority, but as markers of experience, of survival. One by one, the base began to re-examine how it measured worth. It wasn't just cultural, it became structural. Colonel Carter, now fully aware of the weight Eva carried, issued a directive to reintroduce skill-based assessments across the flight program. No more assumptions based solely on uniforms or files. Experience proven in field, sim, or hangar would take precedence. A new tier of evaluation was quietly reinstated, tactical readiness verification, something long buried after being considered too unconventional. Eva didn't ask for any of it. In fact, she remained distant from the reforms her presence had inspired. She still kept to the hangars, still preferred turning wrenches to shaking hands, but her voice, when it did come, carried gravity. When she offered a suggestion, people rewrote procedures. When she called for backup, squadrons scrambled without hesitation, and slowly, something else happened. Pilots began opening up. Veterans who'd flown under call signs long forgotten stopped by the maintenance bay just to say thank you. Mechanics started finding training requests folded neatly on their benches. The line between enlisted and officer blurred just slightly, just enough. It wasn't equality by command. It was respect by recognition. Eva took none of the credit. She wore no new insignia. When they offered to repaint her Apache with custom tail art, Echo 1 flanked by wings and steel, she refused. "It's just a bird," she said. "Let it speak for itself." But those who flew with her, those who watched her drop into valleys and return with lives clutched in her shadow, knew better. The bird had a voice because she gave it one. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, casting gold across the airstrip, Eva stood alone at the edge of the tarmac. Her helmet hung from one hand. The wind tugged lightly at her sleeves. Behind her, the Apache sat quiet and still, the blades catching the dying light like obsidian glass. She didn't move, didn't pose, didn't wait for applause. It wasn't her way. She stood there for a long time, watching the sky shift colors, her silhouette carved against the horizon. No reporters, no ceremonies, just the low hum of an airbase preparing for night. What she did wasn't for glory. It was for the people who never made it back, for the ones whose stories were buried in footnotes, whose names were redacted, whose service never made it past a locked drawer in a Pentagon sub-basement. For them, she flew, and for them, she stood. No nameplate, no salute, just a legend without a business card.